We're going to go over the anatomy of the gastrointestinal system. Here's just a summary of what the ingested material is called where, because I think it gets a little bit confusing. So the food that you take in your mouth and esophagus, it's called the bolus. And then when it reaches the stomach and small intestine, it turns into the chyme. And then in the large intestine, it becomes the feces. There are two parts to the digestive system. There's the GI tract, which forms a long muscular tube that extends from the mouth to the anus. And then there's the accessory glands, which aid in the digestive processes. So this includes the salivary glands, pancreas, liver, and gallbladder. And then here's just a picture of the anatomy of the GI system. The wall of the GI tract, the inner layer is the mucous membrane. So this secretes mucus, which helps protect the lining of the GI tract. And in the wall, we have smooth muscle, which will propel and mix the contents. There are nerves in the GI wall as well. And the nerves are very extensive in the GI tract. They kind of call it your second brain. And then there's obviously blood vessels and lymphatic vessels, which are needed to absorb the nutrients in water. And then we also have lymphatic tissue throughout the GI system as well. And this is where white blood cells will hang out and look for any invaders. And keep in mind, you do not need to memorize all of these layers. We're going to take a look at the mouth down to the stomach first. So the functions of the mouth, this is where mechanical digestion starts. So chewing or mastication is going to break the food down into smaller pieces, and saliva is going to be secreted from the salivary glands to help lubricate the food to make it easier to swallow. And we're also going to start chemical digestion of the carbohydrates here, because the salivary glands secrete the digestive enzyme salivary amylase. The pharynx is the back of the throat area, and this is where both the air and food and drink will go through before they go their separate ways down the esophagus or the trachea. The esophagus is a long muscular tube that goes from the pharynx to the stomach. The upper 1/3 is made out of skeletal muscle, and then the rest of it is made out of smooth muscle. There are two sphincters that control the movement of food and drink down from the pharynx into the stomach. And it also prevents things from accidentally going back up when it's not supposed to. Obviously, during vomiting, you'll relax these two sphincters to allow things to move out so you can vomit. So there's an upper esophageal sphincter, and then the lower esophageal sphincter is between the end of the esophagus and the stomach. Stomach has several functions. It will store the food temporarily, and it's also going to finish the mechanical digestion as the stomach churns. It'll further break up the food into smaller pieces. And this is where we're going to form chyme, which is kind of a soupy mix of the food particles and the gastric juice. We're also going to chemically digest the proteins starting in the stomach. So we'll use the help of hydrochloric acid or stomach acid, which will denature the proteins or unfold them. And then pepsin will start breaking the proteins down into smaller pieces. The stomach contains rugae, which are folds inside the stomach that allow it to expand to accommodate more food and drink. And the smooth muscle contractions will help mix and break down the food further, doing mechanical digestion and then move it into the small intestine. And there's another sphincter, the pyloric sphincter, which will control the movement of the chyme from the stomach into the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine. And then here's just a picture of the stomach. You can see the rugae, the folds that allow it to expand and accommodate more food and drink. And then here's the pyloric sphincter that will control the movement of the chyme from the stomach into the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine. The stomach secretes several things. It secretes mucus, which will help protect the stomach lining from the hydrochloric acid. The hydrochloric acid is going to be secreted by parietal cells, and that makes the stomach very acidic with a pH of 2. The hydrochloric acid is going to help start digesting the proteins by denaturing the proteins, unfolding them, and then also the very acidic pH of the stomach will kill many microorganisms that you may have ingested with your food or drink. Pepsinogen is also secreted, and that's coming from the chief cells. Pepsinogen is inactive, but then it will be converted to the active form pepsin when it comes into contact with the stomach acid. And pepsin is going to start the protein digestion and start breaking the protein into smaller pieces. So the gastric pits are where we're going to be secreting the pepsinogen and the hydrochloric acid from. And if you look at the close-up view, you can see these chief cells. They're named that because that's the most numerous type of cells, so they are the chief type of cell in the gastric pits, so that's how they got their name. They're going to secrete the pepsinogen, and then the parietal cells in purple, they're going to secrete the stomach acid. And remember, parietal just means wall. The small intestine is really important. This is where most of the chemical digestion and absorption occurs, so I would star that. That's really important to know. There's 3 divisions to the small intestine. It starts right after the stomach with the duodenum, and then it moves into the jejunum and then the ileum. The reason it got the name small intestine, it's talking about it has a smaller diameter than the large intestine does. Secretions into the duodenum include the pancreatic juice, which contains digestive enzymes, and also bicarbonate, which is going to neutralize the stomach acid that's coming in with the chyme. And then we're also going to be secreting bile into the duodenum. Bile is secreted by the liver, stored in the gallbladder, and it contains bile salts, which are made from cholesterol, and they aid in fat digestion. So they're going to emulsify the fat or break it into smaller droplets, which will make it easier for the enzymes to digest it. Since the small intestine is where we're going to be doing the majority of absorption of our nutrients and water, we need a really large surface area. So to increase the surface area of the small intestine, it's very long, 8 to 10 feet long. It has these circular folds called plicae, and then there's villi and microvilli, which we'll look at on the next picture. So the villi are little finger-like projections that will stick out of the mucous membrane here. And you can see a plica there, one of the folds, so that all is going to increase surface area and allow you to absorb more of the nutrients and water. Here's a close-up view of a villus in the small intestinal wall. And you can see that the lacteals in green and the blood vessels will extend up into the villus, and we're going to absorb the nutrients there. And then the wall is actually made out of epithelial cells, and the epithelial cells have microvilli on them that form the brush border. And this will all increase surface area and increase the amount of nutrients and water that can be absorbed. The brush border is important, we'll talk about later, but it contains some of the digestive enzymes there. And then just another close-up of a villus. So you can see the lacteal extending up there, and that's going to absorb the chylomicrons, which is a lipoprotein that's going to be carrying the lipids that you've absorbed from your diet. And then any of the monosaccharides and amino acids that you've absorbed, they will go directly into this capillary. The liver is really important in processing nutrients. So all of the monosaccharides, those carbohydrates you've absorbed, and also all of the amino acids from the proteins in your diet, they will all first go to the liver before they go to anywhere else in the body. And that's because there's a portal system. And remember, portal systems, we have 2 capillary beds in a row, and they're going to be joined by a portal vein. So let's take a look at some pictures. So there's capillaries in the small intestine and then also in the large intestine. And we're going to be absorbing most of our nutrients and water from the small intestine. And so the monosaccharides and amino acids will go all into this capillary bed. And then from the colon, we've actually got a few vitamins that we're absorbing there and a little bit of water. And then they will go directly to the liver through the hepatic portal vein. And then there's more capillary beds in the liver where we're going to drop off those nutrients at the liver first. And then the blood will then flow out through the hepatic vein to the inferior vena cava and then back to the right atrium. The large intestine starts with the cecum. The chyme from the small intestine is going to go through the ileocecal sphincter and enter into the cecum. There's also the appendix that's part of the cecum, and that's actually part of the immune system. So a lot of the white blood cells will hang out in lymphatic tissue there, looking for any invaders that you might have ingested. And then from the cecum, it turns into the colon, which will then go to the rectum, which will temporarily store the feces until defecation. And then we have the anus, which there's an internal and external anal sphincter there. So here's the ileum from the small intestine coming in. There's an ileocecal sphincter that controls the entrance of the chyme into the cecum. And then here you can see the appendix, which is part of the immune system. And then the cecum will then turn into the colon, which will then at the end turn into the rectum. And then you've got the internal and external anal sphincter that will control defecation. The colon will compact the things that were not absorbed in the small intestines and form feces out of it. There is a little bit of absorption of water here in the colon to give the final consistency to the feces, but most of the water absorption is going to occur in the small intestines. There's also some electrolytes absorbed here, like sodium chloride, and there's quite a few bacteria that live in the colon, and they produce some of the vitamins for us. So for example, they produce vitamin K, which the liver will use to make clotting factors. And they also produce some B vitamins, which we will absorb through the colon. The accessory glands are going to help with digestion, and they are all exocrine glands. So remember that exocrine glands have a duct that they will secrete their products through to the external environment. And remember, the inside of the GI tract is all considered external environment because it is connected to the outside. The accessory glands include the salivary glands, which secrete saliva, pancreas, which secretes pancreatic juice, liver makes the bile, and gallbladder will store the bile. And then here's just a picture of where the accessory glands are located. And here you can see the ducts that are used in these accessory glands, and secreting things through these ducts makes the accessory glands exocrine glands. Salivary glands are going to secrete saliva, which contains a couple of enzymes. We have salivary amylase, which is going to begin the digestion of carbohydrates. So carbohydrate digestion starts in the mouth with salivary amylase. And there's another enzyme called lysozyme that actually will lyse some of the bacteria that are in the mouth, and that'll help prevent cavities. Saliva also contains bicarbonate ions, which will help neutralize acids in food or drink you're taking in. And it also contains mucus, which will help lubricate the food and make it easier to swallow. The pancreas is both an endocrine and exocrine gland. The endocrine part secretes the hormones insulin and glucagon. Remember, insulin is secreted right after a meal. That'll lower the blood glucose, and glucagon is going to be secreted when you haven't eaten for a while, and that will raise the blood glucose. The exocrine part of the pancreas is going to secrete pancreatic juice, which contains several digestive enzymes and bicarbonate ions. And the bicarbonate ions are a buffer. They're going to help neutralize the stomach acid that's coming in with the chyme from the stomach. And then the pancreatic juice will be secreted into the pancreatic ducts, which will join with the common bile duct to empty into the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine. The pancreas makes several digestive enzymes. There's pancreatic amylase, which will break down carbohydrates. Pancreatic lipase breaks down lipids. Proteases or peptidases, they break down proteins. An example of a protease would be trypsin. And then nucleases break down nucleic acids. And then also there's going to be bicarbonate ions in the pancreatic juice as well, which will neutralize the acidic chyme coming in from the stomach. Here's a picture of the pancreas with the pancreatic duct, which will carry the pancreatic juice. The common bile duct will join in, and then they will both empty into the duodenum. The liver is the largest internal organ in the body, and it has over 200 different functions, so it does a lot of things for the body. There's two different types of liver cells. The hepatocytes do much of the work of the liver, and they will make the bile. Hepato just means liver. The other type of cells are macrophages, also called Kupffer cells. They're a type of white blood cell that are phagocytic. They will eat red blood cells that are old, any bacteria that might have come through from the intestines, and any debris. So they'll kind of like the cleaners. And then we also have the hepatic portal system, which is really important because that ensures that the liver gets first crack at the carbohydrates and proteins that you're absorbing from your food. Here's a cross section of the liver, so you can see these lobules. And then if we take a look at the lobules, a little bit closer view here, you can see all the hepatocytes here. And you can see the portal vein coming through. And that's going to be bringing in the carbohydrates and amino acids that were absorbed from the small intestines directly into the liver, where those nutrients oftentimes are going to be processed. And then we've got a arteriole that's going to be bringing in fresh oxygen and any other nutrients the liver needs. And then the central vein is going to drain the blood into the hepatic vein, and then that will go to the inferior vena cava and then back to the right atrium. And then this picture just shows the macrophages here kind of in pink that will eat any old red blood cells or any bacteria or anything that has gotten into the liver. And then this also shows the bile duct as well, because the hepatocytes are going to be making bile, and so they will drain into the bile duct and be taken to the gallbladder. The liver has many functions. There's over 200, but I just have a few of them that are listed here. It's really important to note, though, that the liver does not make any digestive enzymes at all. So salivary glands, the stomach, and the pancreas will make digestive enzymes, but the liver does not make any digestive enzymes. So one of the functions of the liver is to make bile and secrete that into the duodenum. The bile contains bile salts, which are made from cholesterol, and the bile salts are really important in that they will emulsify the fat. So emulsification just means they're going to break the fat droplets into smaller droplets, which will make it easier for the pancreatic lipases, the enzymes, to digest the lipids. We also have bicarbonate ions in the bile that'll neutralize the stomach acid coming in with the chyme. And then we also have bilirubin, which gives the color to the bile. And remember, the bilirubin is produced from the hemoglobin when it's broken down. That heme group minus the iron that's taken off, that all turns into bilirubin. And it's kind of a greenish pigment. Another huge function of the liver is to process nutrients. So remember, it gets first crack at the monosaccharides and the amino acids that have been absorbed from the small intestine. So it's going to take that glucose and make glycogen, which remember that's called glycogenesis. It can take amino acids and turn those into fatty acids. It also will make some other lipids like triglycerides and cholesterol, and then it will package those all up into lipoproteins to transport in the blood to the body cells. It also makes urea. Remember, that's formed when you're breaking down amino acids and that amino group gets chopped off. That amino group gets turned into urea by the liver, and then the urea will be excreted by the kidneys into the urine. And during the post-absorptive state, it's been a while since you've eaten, you need to increase your blood glucose, so it will break down the glycogen stores that are in the liver, so glycogenolysis will occur. And it also will do gluconeogenesis. So this is where it's going to take things that are not carbohydrates and make them into glucose. And if a lot of fats are being broken down, the liver will also convert fatty acids into ketones, which can also be used as an energy source by the body cells, but it is a problem if you're a type 1 diabetic and you have too many ketones building up that can cause diabetic ketoacidosis. And then here's just a picture of the lipoproteins. You just have some proteins that are stuck in with these lipids to make it mix with the water in the blood a little bit better. The macrophages, or Kupffer cells in the liver, will also remove old red blood cells. The spleen does most of this, but the liver can also help out. And as the macrophages break down the red blood cells and break apart the hemoglobin, it takes that heme group apart and will recycle the iron, and then the rest of the heme group turns into bilirubin. And then the bilirubin will go into the bile, or it could also go out into the blood and then be excreted by the kidneys. The liver is also really important in detoxifying things, so a lot of medications and other toxins will be detoxified and eliminated in the liver. And also the liver has a big job of making most of the plasma proteins. So it makes the albumin, the clotting factors, angiotensinogen, which is part of the RAS system. So there's a lot of plasma proteins that are made by the liver as well. And then lastly, the liver does have some endocrine function. It does secrete a hormone, insulin-like growth factor, in response to growth hormone. It's also part of the pathway that's used to activate vitamin D3. And then it also will inactivate and get rid of many of the hormones in the body by breaking them down. Let's take a look at the biliary system. The liver is going to make the bile, which will then be stored in the gallbladder. And when the chyme comes from the stomach into the duodenum, if it contains a lot of lipids in it, that will stimulate the gallbladder to contract and secrete the bile down the common bile duct, which will then empty into the duodenum. And this is just a close-up just showing you how the common bile duct and the pancreatic duct will both join together and then empty into the duodenum. And there is a muscular sphincter here that will control the opening and closing. And then this is just a list of the GI organs and their functions, so this would be good to review for the exam as well.